Hello, 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 and welcome back to This Is Me Attitude Podcast with me, your one and only host, Rachel Nelson, just a girl in her 20s, trying to figure this crazy life out and bring you along the way every single step of the way. And today is no different as we dive in to a great conversation. The start of today's episode sounds a little bit different because I have added in sponsorships, and now I'm going to go into the first sponsor and then we'll go right into an amazing conversation. Like I mentioned in the intro, I truly hope that today's conversation with Christa blesses you, and I'm so excited to see what you think. The first sponsor for today's episode is World Financial Group, your partner in achieving financial freedom. Are you tired of juggling all the moving parts of your financial life? From managing investments and planning for retirement to dealing with taxes or protecting your legacy, it can feel overwhelming. That's where Jennifer Bland and World Financial Group comes in. At World Financial Group, they offer full-service financial solutions designed to simplify your life and help you reach your goals. Whether you're just starting to build wealth, growing your business, or securing your family's future, they create personalized strategies tailored just for you. The best part? At World Financial Group, they don't work for you, they work with you. That means clear, honest advice and a plan that's easy to understand and built around your dreams. So why wait? Start taking control of your financial future today. Schedule a free consultation by calling Jennifer Bland at 916-203-8912. Again, that's 916-203-8912. They will help you turn your financial goals into a strategy and your dreams into a reality. Welcome back to This Is Me Attitude Podcast. I am so excited to say, yes, I have another guest speaker, and I know that's been a common theme lately, but I am not going to stop what God is doing because He's been connecting me with so many amazing other believers and women of faith, women in business. That is really a great way to jump into today's conversation, as I have connected with Christa, and it is going to be just an awesome time. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Christa.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, before we jump into the questions, I want to make sure that I give a full round welcome to you. And if there's anything that I missed for the listeners to know, if you would like to introduce yourself a little bit more.
Sure. So my name's Christa Nichols. My husband and I live on a farm in Iowa. We've got 2 adult kids, and I'm a sales copywriter who writes digital marketing campaigns for online coaches and course creators, as well as I help moms launch freelance copywriting businesses so they can write their way to freedom from anywhere they want to.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And that can lead us right into our first question of when and how did you become a Christian / accept Jesus into your life?
So my family, I was very blessed to grow up in a Christian family. My parents had become Christians when I was born. There were some complications that led them to really look deeply into their lives, and they found Jesus as their savior. So they taught me from the time I was tiny. And I remember making the decision when I was around 6. I was in Awana and someone had come and spoken, and it just really clicked for me. Like, no, I have to make this decision. This is something I want. I want to belong to Jesus, and I know I need Jesus in my life. And so I've been following Jesus since I was little, and it's a journey, like learning more every day and every year what it really means to follow Christ and what it really means to have him be the Lord of your life and let him steer your ship. It's not just a prayer. It's your life. It's a transformation of you from the inside out every single day.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I really just want to add how you said that it's not a prayer, it's your life, because I think that's something that listeners, I hope that you can either write down or really think about, because yes, if you accept Jesus at a young age, like it is the physical thing you're doing is praying to him and asking him to come into your heart, but it is a walk with the Lord. It is all your life thing. Like it's not something that you can just go back and forth with day in and day out. Like it's renewing your mind every single day and being with him every single day. And I just It just gives me goosebumps when you talk about your story, because it's just so cool to see how even from that young of an age you saw like this Jesus guy, like he sounds like a good idea, like he sounds like what I need and what I want. And I know that that's not always everyone's story of being that young and being able to fully grasp that concept and being able to walk forward and knowing that that's what the right answer is. And for listeners, if that wasn't your similar to your exact story, if you were older or if there was anything different than that, I'm not saying that one story over the other is better or anything like that. It's just very interesting and exciting to see how each person's walk is so different and how God does communicate completely different per person because he knows that he created us differently. Into our second question of where have you seen God work the most in your life?
I think for me, God really has to work on me as far as trust. So throughout my life, in different ways, different areas of my life, he has helped me grow to trust him more. And the more I see him work, the easier it is to trust. So I'm pretty self-sufficient. Um, Compared to a lot of people, I haven't faced a ton of challenges in my life. And I think that tends to make you feel like, hey, I've got it all together. Like I can handle it. But he continues to show me like the strength that you have is not from you, it's from me. So you can trust that the path you're on, I'm going to give you the strength to do what I want you to do. Probably the most recent challenge that God really had to work on me was I lost a business in 2017, 2018. I had been doing the same thing for 16 years, and just in the space of one phone call, it all fell apart. And I realized that I had to come up with something quick because we had just retired my husband to work with me in that business. We had just pulled our kids from school so that we could homeschool them. So we had all these plans, and suddenly the ground was kind of no longer under our feet. But it was one of the most amazing things that happened to me because it forced me to take a look at what I really wanted to do. What was I talented at? What did I really enjoy? And through that, God pushing me out of the nest, he showed me that there was a different kind of business that I could have, one where I actually did what I loved every single day and was able to even better provide for my family than before. And I've met so many amazing people and made so many friends who've become like family. If I had not been willing to step out and just follow the path as it came day by day, and sometimes it felt like hour by hour, then I would have missed something really so beautiful.
That beautiful is the greatest word to use for that, because it definitely shows how trusting in the Lord is so important. And for those that might know me personally, you might be chuckling because that's one of the biggest things that I struggle with is trust. I know a lot of my close friends always have to remind me, like, remember, we believe in God, He's bigger and better, and having to move forward, especially in seasons like that where it does feel like the ground is taken away from you. That's not always the first thing that your mind goes to is, oh, God's there. Sometimes it's like, what are we going to do? Like,
What? Yeah.
and I can only imagine to add the pressure of with your husband being home and then we're just planning on bringing the kids home. Like that's a lot of different variables. And then for the stream of income to be like, oh, it's gone. You're like, okay, God, like what now?
It was huge upheaval, but it really forced me to grow as a person and lean on God. And I can remember praying over and over every day, just show me where you want me to go. Show me what you want me to do. And if it's not to open a door, I'll take a window. Like, just show me a window. And he did.
I also think that that goes to show just how much you do trust in the Lord and how your faith, like you were saying, how it was growing, and just to be able to remember to pray each day about that, because that's obviously an act that we have to do. Like that's something that God always tells us to do, is to pray and to have communication with Him, because yes, He already knows everything, but it's a lot easier to communicate with Him and like have things continue to progress forward when you're already in that communication.
Absolutely. And I always try to remind myself too, like, I can't imagine things the way that God does. My mind can't do that. But he always brings me down a path that was better than I could have imagined. That was better for me. There's pain in the journey. There's growth in the journey. There's suffering in the journey, but it's always for my good. It's for the good of my family. It brings us closer to him. It puts the right people in our path that he wants us to serve. I just remind myself, no matter what you think, Christa, it's never going to be as good as God's plan.
That is a huge, huge thing, because that also goes with being in God's timing and not our own. Because as humans, and especially myself, I know I've said this in other episodes, that I would love to sit and plan out my day to day, or just in even a week's time. And then I feel like sometimes God's in heaven be like, that's cute. Nope, you're going to do this, this, and this. That's not what I have planned for you. And it always does end up better. It just shows in the overall picture. And now the fact that you have a full other thriving business, that was what God was wanting you to focus on. I'm sure in the moment it obviously didn't feel like that, but to be able to continue to have that faith and continue to move forward with the Lord, and then seeing the fruit of it, is just really cool. And I think just an overall really awesome story of seeing how God works in just the everyday life.
And I think when you're willing to look back and see the path, it really helps build those faith muscles, because you can say, well, God didn't abandon me then, and he's certainly not going to abandon me now.
The second sponsor for today's show is Coach Bridget Lynch. Work with Coach Bridget today. She's a coach, speaker, and author. Her latest book, Out of the Darkness, draws from her own profound journey of transformation. Through her authentic and heartfelt writing, Bridget shares her experience of facing life's most daunting challenges and emerging stronger than ever. If you are ready to work with someone that will encourage you, uplift you, and help you grow your relationship with the Lord, Bridget could be your coach. Contact Coach Bridget today by email at info@coachbridgetlynch.com or by her website at www.coachbridgetlynch.com. This next question, I feel like you might have already answered, but I'll ask it anyways. And it says, do you believe God has delivered you from something?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, he's delivered me from myself. He's not left me where I am, but he's obviously delivered me from the consequences of my sin. I can't stand in the presence of God without what he's done for me, but he has delivered me from so much selfishness and pride. He continues to do that. It's an ongoing battle. It's an ongoing transformation, but I think too, there are certain relationships that he's removed me out of for my benefit. Doesn't always feel good, but you can look back and be like, yep, there was a reason for that. And yeah, when it came to my business, he plucked me out of one that didn't really have a future and put me in one that is just a fulfillment of the gifts and talents he gave me.
I also like how you mentioned delivered you from yourself of the pridefulness, because that is something that we as humans can just be very prideful, and that's not what God calls us to do at all, and to actually humble ourselves, which I know probably most listening to this episode or podcast have read the Bible at some point or have seen that in the Bible, but it's completely different from reading it to actually living it and seeing how God can do that in your life. I kind of was chuckling when you said that, because I struggle with that same thing too, of different aspects of looking back. I'm like, oh, I was being prideful. God, thank you for humbling me. In the moment, it didn't feel good, but I understand why now. Thank you. Or just different experiences like that. In the moment, it doesn't always make sense, or it doesn't always seem like the right possible move. But then hindsight is always 2020. When you're looking back, then you can see what God was doing, or why he had you maybe take a certain job, or maybe do this certain aspect to come to a bigger thing in the end.
Right. I think it's really, really common in the entrepreneur space or women in business space. There's a lot of personal development that goes on, and it tells you, believe in yourself, tap into your inner strength, lead with your heart. Okay, well, all I have is from him, and any inner strength that I have would fold without his guidance and support in my life. And so I think it's hard to you have to really have a perspective from the word of God, so that you're not led into that type of self-sufficient thinking. It's not wrong to have good self-esteem or be confident in yourself. But when you attribute all of that to yourself, you're not giving credit where credit's due. You're also not leaving room for God to work and keep revealing himself to you.
Those are all really good points. And being in the entrepreneur space myself, I definitely relate to that. Of when I first started, I was like, oh, I need to read all the books and like do all the things that like all these other successful people are doing, and not even putting two and two together that, oh, maybe they're not believers or they don't have the same understanding of God as I do. And then reading all that, it's definitely goes against our beliefs and what God is wanting us to do, because we cannot get our strength from ourselves. And that's really a big thing that I think is in like mainstream media. Oh, you can do all the things and you can have this hustle culture, when God tells us to take a Sabbath every week and do absolutely nothing on one day. We always want to make sure that we're following the Bible and listening to God over the other things is really my main point that I wanted to get across for listeners. What made you decide to share your faith so much with those around you?
Well, I feel like when something is such a big part of your life, you can't help but share it. So we can share all day long about our favorite hobbies, our favorite sports teams, our favorite brand of makeup. And yet those things are not going to help someone past today. Those are short fly by night things that change. And as you grow, why would I not share the most important thing in my life that can impact somebody's eternity? I like to keep that perspective in mind, because I might be the only person that somebody hears about Jesus from. And because it's such a big part of my life, I want it to just be a part of how I communicate, how I love and serve others. So yeah, I want to be sharing about things that really matter, that really make an impact forever.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true. The more that I've grown in my faith, the more I love talking about it. And the more I've connected with other believers, I was like, oh yeah, what's your coming to Jesus story? Or what's your story that God did this day? Like, I want to hear all of it. Like, I'll sit and listen. And also the fact of saying that it is the most important thing, because we as believers sometimes are the only connection that non-believers have to Jesus. Like, they won't maybe see that themselves of going to church or doing other things, but that's what we're called to do. Like it says in the Bible, to go out and share the good news. That means to share what God has done in your life and to be ambassadors. That's another thing that's mentioned in the Bible, and that really means to have the faith and to feel strong in sharing what he's done in your life. I don't ever want anybody to feel ashamed or scared of sharing their faith, because that's something that is part of my story. At first, when starting this podcast, I didn't intend to talk about faith, and then God brought it to me to talk about faith, and I honestly wanted to skirt away from it for a little while because it was nerve-wracking. I'm like, that sounds terrifying, God. What do you mean I have to go on and do this and that and share and all the things? But now I can't picture myself doing anything else with the podcast, and it's brought on great guest speakers like Christa, and to be able to connect with people that probably would have never been a connection if I wouldn't have done that transition and being obedient to the Lord. And that just really makes me think of another aspect for you listeners, is to always be obedient in the Lord and really hear what he's saying to you in prayer or in any other way that he's speaking to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. My husband has had such a big impact on me in this way, because it just comes so naturally to him. So we have kind of opposite stories. He had a really rough childhood and a very dramatic salvation experience. And he just has open arms for everyone. And he's really good at seeing people who need a friend and just becoming their friend, no matter who they are, where they're at. It just leads to these conversations about, why did you even reach out to me? Why do I'm not somebody that people like to hang around. I've seen person after person after person turn to Christ because just one person made them important, showed them that somebody cared about them. I just can't get over it.
I also think that's encouragement for the listeners as well, to remember that we do make an impact with just sharing our story, because I feel like a lot of times I've heard from others of like, oh, my salvation story isn't as big and dramatic as like what people are sharing on social media or this and that, so it doesn't count as much or something like that. That's not true. It counts regardless of how big you think it is or small you think it is. That story could be very relatable to the next person because maybe you could relate to somebody that's been through a similar situation where I couldn't relate to that person because I haven't been in that situation, and they would look at me and be like, "Oh, you don't understand. Like, I don't want to hear about what you have to say about Jesus because you don't understand," or vice versa. And just being able to have those different experiences, that's really exciting to hear about your husband. I have a few different friends that are similar to that, and it's just interesting to see how people are just really attracted to them and being able to just talk to anyone. You're like, okay, like that's awesome. Bring more people to Jesus. I love that aspect of it. What made you decide to share your faith online?
Well, I think because it's just another avenue to be honest about my life and who I am and what I'm about. I just can't see leaving my faith out of it because it's such a big part of my life. I know that it's not popular and it's not something I talk about a lot because my business is faith-based, but it's not like connected to the church or anything. But my audience, my students, my clients, they all know that I'm a Christian, and I don't see any point in hiding it because that's just who I am. If Jesus was not holding back in order to reach me, then I need to return the favor and just be an open book. I consider it a privilege to be able to do that.
That almost gave me like goosebumps of how you said that that Jesus didn't hold back for us, so why would we, or why should we hold back for somebody else? And it's so true because that could mean the difference of someone's salvation, their eternity. That's a huge, huge thing, and is something that I think that isn't always looked at as how big it is. It's not just going to church. It's not just talking about Jesus and what he's done in your life. It's literally looking at the person in front of you and being like, I want you to have a full and abundant eternity, and this is how you can have that. It's just really, really beautiful, for lack of better words. How has God impacted your business? And can you share with the listeners what your business is? Which I know you mentioned a little bit before, but if you want to go in detail.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a sales copywriter. I help write marketing campaigns for people who use digital marketing ads and paid traffic to promote their offers and services. I can honestly say I would not be doing this business if God had not orchestrated the whole thing, because I am a cautious person by nature. I would not have been the kind to just one day decide I was going to leave the business that I had to start something new. I'd been like, oh no, that's too risky. That's too scary. That's too many uncertainties. So 100% the business I have today is because that's where God placed me. And I've seen time and time again, the clients that he brings are such amazing people. The network connections I've been able to make have become some of our closest friends. And we've been able to work with people all over the world. And that would have never happened on my own. I just am not that bold. I'm just not that brave on my own. And so that is just, I mean, God gave me my business, period.
And I give you credit for being that honest and open and saying that you don't think you'd have been that bold by yourself, because I feel like not everyone would be willing to say that. And I can also relate in that aspect of different things that have happened with my business and the podcast, of just not being bold enough on my own, or seeing how God took certain things away of like, okay, this is what you're going for now. It's just awesome to see how God has worked in literally every aspect of your business.
Yeah, I love my comfort zone. So I've had to learn that leaving my comfort zone is the key sometimes. Being willing to just step out and say, okay, all right, I'll trust you because he's trustworthy.
What would you like to tell brand new business owners that you wish you knew when you first started?
I think when I first started, it was just a desperation move. So I did a lot of things and became brave. And I think nothing helps you grow as a person more than having a business. You can't grow in that way as an employee. Just only happens when you have to become the leader that your business needs. You're not going to be that person at first, and that's okay, because the only way to become the leader your business needs is to act like the leader your business needs, is to step into that even before you feel ready, even before you feel equipped, even before you feel like you can, and just do the next right thing in front of you. And you will become the leader your business needs. It's not going to happen overnight, but you will grow, you will mature, it will make you tougher, and you'll be better for it.
Yes, thank you. I honestly feel like I needed that reminder today of the business owner my business needs, because as most listeners, I think you know that I am a business owner as well, and I would 100% agree with Christa in the fact of how much you grow and how much you really learn about yourself. And especially when you're an entrepreneur, there's no one else that you can blame for that thing not getting done or that thing not happening right. Like it's on you, and you really start to learn that and reflect more on yourself and your beliefs and what you were doing before and all of it. At least in my experience, I have. And that's through this entrepreneur journey is really when I've grown the most in my faith as well. And I don't think that's by any accident. I definitely think that is what God intended. I'm sure that a lot of other believers can say the same thing that are in business.
Definitely. Yeah. So bottom line, don't wait till you feel ready, because you're not ready yet, but you get ready by taking action.
Yes. 100% agree with that as well. That actually answers my next question of what would you like the listeners to get out of our conversation today? So if there's anything else you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, if there's something that you in the back of your mind know that God has been calling you to, even if it's scary, even if you don't know how it's all going to work out, you can't fail at something God calls you to, because he doesn't wait and look for the person who's already perfect. There's no such thing. He equips the people that he calls, and that's better than what we can do on our own. So if you know there's something he's calling you to, just commit and be willing to do the next thing in front of you. You don't have to have the whole big picture figured out. You can take the next right step today and then do it again tomorrow and the next day and the next day, because he won't leave you and he won't let you down.
Yes, so many great things to that. And listeners, I hope that you took all of them, because that is so true in the fact of it doesn't have to all be figured out. That's another thing that I have to remind myself. So listeners, if you're like me and you want it all planned out, that's not always how God works through things. That's also talking about your faith as well, because taking that next step is taking a step in faith. And that's showing being obedient. And that's what God sees that. And he sees that, okay, you've taken that step. Now you're ready to take this step. Like most of the time, we're not ready to take the 10 steps that we want to be able to take yet. Or the 10 steps might change along the way. At step 5, you might go a completely different way than what you thought you would if you don't take it step by step. Hopefully with that analogy, I didn't lose people, because I feel like I kind of went all the way around it. But
oh no, all the way.
To wrap our conversation up, where can people find you after our conversation?
Sure. So I am on all social platforms, and my handle is at Christa Nichols Copy. So Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn.
Amazing.
All of those things.
Listeners, if you are driving or doing something and you didn't get those, I will make sure to have it in the description below today's episode. I highly, highly encourage you to reach out if maybe you could work with Christa in her business, or just for a really great conversation, because that's how her and I originally connected. I want to say a huge thank you to you, Christa, for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
Wasn't that awesome? Oh my goodness gracious. I got so much out of that conversation. I cannot say thank you enough to you, the listeners, for tuning in to this great conversation. I cannot say thank you enough to Christa for having the great conversation with me. And apparently I'm just going to say great conversation multiple times through today's episode. So thank you for listening to that. I also want to remind you of a few things. One, we have the email list. That is where the party is at. That is where you get to know all of the ins and outs of what's going on in This Is Me Attitude podcast and the This Is Me community. If I go on any other person's podcast, that's where you get to hear if anything else happens or changes or big events happen. That is where it's at. So join the email list. The link is below. Also want to remind you of sharing whatever takeaway you got from today's episode over on Instagram and tag the podcast at This Is Me Attitude Podcast. I absolutely love hearing what you've gotten out of these episodes, and it truly helps me create more and more episodes and to see what is needed, and it helps encourage me as well. I will be very honest about that. The other thing I wanted to mention is, yes, you can be a sponsor on the show. Today's episode was the first episode that has the sponsorships in them with the 2 commercials. That is something that you can expect to see in future episodes. If you are a Christian business owner and you believe that you align with this podcast and what I talk about, and meaning talking about faith, that is something that we can have a conversation about, of you coming on and being the next sponsorship for This Is Me Attitude podcast. So I think that's all of the announcements for today. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until we meet next time, never, ever, ever forget, God loves you.